As the clock ticked down to his execution, Charles Starkweather knew his time had come. At just 19 years old, he had already taken 11 lives, leaving a trail of violence that would become one of the most notorious killing sprees in American history. But in his final moments, what went through his mind? Did he feel the weight of his crimes? Or had he already accepted his fate, indifferent to the lives he had destroyed? In this video, we explore the chilling final 24 hours of Charles Starkweather, the mind of a killer as death looms closer than ever before. Charles Starkweather's path to death was shaped by circumstances that seemed ordinary on the surface. Born in Lincoln, Nebraska, he was the fourth of 7 children in a working-class family. His father, Guy, worked as a carpenter, but was frequently unemployed due to rheumatoid arthritis in his hands, while his mother, Helen, worked as a waitress to help support the family. Despite their financial struggles, by most accounts, they were decent, loving parents who provided what appeared to be a normal childhood. But Starkweather's troubles began when he started school. He was born with genu varum, a mild birth defect that caused his legs to be misshapen, and claimed he was teased by classmates because of a speech impediment. As he grew older, the only subject in which he excelled was physical education, where he found an outlet for his mounting rage. From prison, he would later reflect that his hatred for society was spawned on the kindergarten playground, when classmates mocked his speech impediment and bow legs, making him feel isolated and different. The bullying and rejection took their toll. What began as childhood teasing evolved into something darker as Starkweather entered his teenage years. His resentment toward the world deepened, and his behavior became increasingly erratic. Meanwhile, his family life deteriorated when his father admitted to pushing Charles through a window, and Helen eventually divorced Guy on grounds of extreme cruelty. The combination of social rejection and family breakdown created a perfect storm of anger and alienation. By the time he met 13-year-old Carol Ann Fugate in 1956, Starkweather had already dropped out of school and taken a job as a garbage man. At 18, he was drifting through life with no direction, consumed by bitterness toward a world he felt had rejected him. His relationship with the much younger Fugate became central to his identity, but his worldview was increasingly shaped by a bleak philosophy. Dead people are all on the same level. Starkweather no longer saw life as precious. He saw it as something to be controlled, manipulated, and ultimately taken when it suited him. The tension that had been building inside Starkweather for years finally erupted on November 30th, 1957, when a simple dispute over a stuffed animal escalated into murder. He shot and killed Robert Calvert, a gas station attendant, marking the start of a deadly rampage that would leave 10 more victims in its wake. On January 21st, 1958, Charles Starkweather's killing spree reached its terrifying peak. He drove to the home of Carol Ann Fugate's family, where his hatred for them would set the stage for horrific violence. Marion Bartlett and Velda Fugate had long disapproved of the relationship between Starkweather and their 14-year-old daughter. That day, their warning to stay away would be their last decision. In a fit of rage, Starkweather shot both Marion and Velda at point-blank range, but the violence didn't end there. He then turned on Carol Ann Fugate's 2-year-old sister, Betty Jean, and brutally beat her to death with a heavy object. To cover his tracks, Starkweather hid the bodies in an outhouse and chicken coop, placing a note in the window claiming the family was sick with the flu. When Carol Ann returned home, Starkweather claimed her family was being held hostage and that her cooperation would ensure their safety. This claim, which Fugate maintained for the rest of her life, became a central point of debate. The question of whether she was a victim, manipulated into assisting a killer, or a willing accomplice in the murders remains a subject of intense discussion to this day. The violence didn't stop with the Bartletts. Fleeing the scene, they stopped at the farmhouse of 70-year-old August Meyer, one of Starkweather's family friends. Starkweather killed Meyer with a shotgun blast to the head, along with Meyer's dog, in another brutal display of disregard for life. The couple continued their spree, picking up two teenagers, Robert Jensen and his girlfriend Carol King, in Bennett, Nebraska. Starkweather forced them at gunpoint to a remote storm cellar. In an act of horrifying cruelty, he shot Robert Jensen execution style in the back of the head, then attempted to sexually assault Carol King. When she resisted, he killed her as well. Their next target was wealthy industrialist Chester Lower Ward and his family. Breaking into the Ward residence, Starkweather brutally killed the maid, 51-year-old Lillian Fensel, stabbing her to death. He then killed the family dog by snapping its neck to prevent it from alerting the Wards. When Clara Ward arrived home, she was stabbed repeatedly, and Chester Ward was shot when he returned. The killers displayed chilling calculation, stealing Chester Ward's Packard along with valuables from the household before fleeing the scene. As the bodies piled up, law enforcement struggled to piece together the chaos. The public was gripped by fear, yet the fugitive couple remained elusive. By January 27, 1958, police had finally broken into Fugate's home, discovering the grim evidence that linked them to the murders. Each crime scene revealed a pattern of brutal killings, with stolen cars and blood-stained evidence, painting a clearer picture of the perpetrators. But it was the murders of the Wards and their maid, Lillian Fensel, that had already sent shockwaves through Lancaster County, escalating public fear to fever pitch. The panic was fueled by the growing anxiety surrounding juvenile delinquency, a hot topic of the era. Authorities launched an unprecedented manhunt, sending officers on house-to-house searches throughout the area. Nebraska Governor Victor Emanuel Anderson even called in the National Guard. As numerous sightings of Starkweather and Fugate poured in without a successful capture, frustration boiled over. The Lincoln Police Department came under heavy criticism, facing mounting accusations of incompetence. Vigilante groups formed, and Sheriff Merle Carnop resorted to arming men he found in bars, assembling a desperate makeshift posse. But while panic spread across Nebraska, Starkweather and Fugate were already slipping across state lines. With Ward's Packard now identified and too risky to drive, they headed west toward Wyoming, searching for a new way to stay ahead of the law. Outside the town of Douglas, they spotted 34-year-old traveling salesman Merle Collison asleep in his Buick by the highway. Without hesitation, Starkweather woke him and killed him. The murder was senseless, with no warning, no resistance, no mercy. Collison became Starkweather's final victim, gunned down simply for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. His car was taken, and the fugitives continued their flight, unaware that the road ahead would soon run out. Later, Starkweather would claim that Fugate delivered the coup de grace after his shotgun jammed, calling her the most trigger-happy person he had ever met. However, Fugate denied ever killing anyone. But it was this final murder that would prove to be Starkweather's undoing. The salesman's car had a parking brake, something unfamiliar to Starkweather. As he attempted to drive away, the car stalled because he hadn't released the brake. While trying to restart the engine, a passing motorist, geologist Joe Sprinkle, stopped to help. Starkweather threatened him with his gun, and an altercation ensued. At that critical moment, Natrona County Sheriff's Deputy William Romer arrived on the scene. Fugate immediately ran to him, yelling, "It's Starkweather! He's going to kill me!" Starkweather sped off, triggering a high-speed chase with three officers, Deputy Romer, Douglas Police Chief Robert Ainsley, and Converse County Sheriff Earl Heflin, reaching speeds exceeding 100 miles per hour. The chase ended when Sheriff Heflin fired a shot that shattered Starkweather's windshield. Flying glass cut the killer deeply enough to cause bleeding, and believing he was dying, Starkweather stopped and surrendered near Douglas on January 29, 1958. The arrest was anticlimactic compared to the terror he had caused. This man who had coldly executed 11 people was brought down not by courage or defiance, but by cowardice and a simple parking brake he didn't understand. Even in prison, His violent tendencies continued with multiple outbursts while awaiting trial, reinforcing his profile as a man with complete disregard for life. When Starkweather's trial began in 1958, the courtroom was thick with tension. The prosecution laid out the brutal details with overwhelming evidence: stolen cars, blood-stained clothes, confessions, and forensic proof. Yet despite the mountain of evidence, Starkweather showed little remorse, appearing indifferent and detached. His defense team argued that mental disturbance played a role in his crimes, citing his difficult childhood and the bullying he endured. They attempted to frame him as a victim of circumstance, driven to murder by forces beyond his control. However, these arguments were undermined by his cold-blooded actions and complete disregard for the lives he had taken. Starkweather had been mocked and bullied in school for being a slow learner and for being bow-legged. But these struggles did not excuse the brutal violence he inflicted on others. The prosecution painted a darker picture: a man who had planned and carried out each murder with chilling calculation. They argued that Starkweather had used Fugate through manipulation and control, highlighting that he had no real motive, no financial gains, no personal vendettas. He simply killed because he could, each act asserting power over a world he had grown to hate. The jury deliberated for 22 hours before reaching their verdict: guilty. When the judge handed down the death sentence, Starkweather remained stoic, not a tear, not a word of remorse. He simply accepted his fate as if he had been expecting it all along. But Starkweather's case wasn't the only one being decided. Ann Fugate faced her own trial as an alleged accomplice. The question that haunted the proceedings was whether she was a willing participant or another victim of Starkweather's violence. Throughout the legal proceedings, Fugate maintained her innocence, insisting she had been held hostage and forced to witness the horrific crimes. Despite her claims, the judge, after considering the evidence and the testimonies presented, found Fugate guilty of being an accomplice. On November 21, 1958, she was sentenced to life in prison, her fate sealed by the court's decision, which ultimately ruled against her defense of being a victim. The contrast between the two defendants was stark. While Starkweather showed no remorse, Fugate consistently proclaimed her innocence and maintained that she had been terrorized into compliance. Her supporters argued she was as much a victim as those who died, trapped by fear and Starkweather's threats against her family. As Charles Starkweather awaited his fate on death row, his final days were marked by the same detachment and defiance that had characterized his crimes. There would be no last-minute appeals, no dramatic turns of events. He sat quietly in his cell, preparing for the end with an unsettling calm. In interviews with prison officials and reporters, Starkweather gave the impression that he had long accepted his fate. To him, death was simply the next step. Unlike other inmates who expressed regret or sought redemption, Starkweather remained strangely calm, almost unmoved to the looming electric chair. His behavior was particularly unsettling in contrast to the grieving families still picking up the pieces of their shattered lives. He reportedly claimed that if he was to die, then Fugate should die with him, another reflection of his bitter and twisted worldview. His mindset remained one of anger and frustration, a man who had never truly grasped the consequences of his actions. His attorneys made one final appeal attempt, arguing for commutation, but their efforts were swiftly rejected. Starkweather had no real defense left, and his unconcerned demeanor remained unchanged to the end. On June 25, 1959, at 12:04 a.m., Starkweather's time on death row came to an end. The electric chair, ominously known as Old Sparky, stood ready. He walked into the death chamber without ceremony and showed little emotion. Though he gave no final statement, a letter to his parents revealed his mindset. "But Dad, I'm not really sorry, 'cause for the first time Carol and I had more fun." Even in his final moments, Starkweather showed no remorse. His words were not a reflection of guilt, but a bizarre and defiant farewell. As the lethal current surged through his body, the community, the families of his victims, and the nation were left to grapple with the legacy of his murders. Starkweather had become a symbol of cold, unrelenting violence, a reminder of how the human psyche could twist into something unrecognizable. At 12:10 a.m., he was pronounced dead. Charles Starkweather's execution brought a grim sense of closure to his victims' families, but it did little to ease their lasting pain. For the Wards, Jensens, Kings, and others, his death was the end of a long chapter of suffering, but could never bring their loved ones back. However, Starkweather's death sparked an ongoing moral debate that continues to divide society. Is the death penalty truly justice, or is it an irreversible, morally flawed punishment? The public reaction was sharply divided. Many saw his execution as necessary justice, while others viewed it as perpetuating a cycle of violence. The legacy of Starkweather's crimes lingers in how it shaped perceptions of the justice system. His case became a symbol of both the need for justice and the cost of retribution, serving as a dark reminder of the devastating consequences of unchecked rage and the complex questions surrounding capital punishment. The fate of Carol Ann Fugate remained intertwined with Starkweather's legacy. After serving 17 and a half years at the Nebraska Correctional Center for Women in York, Nebraska, she was paroled in June 1976. Settling in Hillsdale, Michigan, Fugate continued to maintain her innocence throughout her imprisonment and beyond, insisting she had been a terrified hostage rather than a willing accomplice. Remarkably, lie detector tests administered to Fugate indicated she was telling the truth about her innocence. Her case raised enduring questions about justice, victimization, and whether the legal system had failed to distinguish between perpetrator and victim. His story remains a chilling testament to the darkest capabilities of human nature and the lasting impact of violence on communities and families, wounds that no amount of legal justice can fully heal. What are your thoughts on this case and the questions it raises about justice and punishment? Share your perspectives in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification for more in-depth true crime analysis.